everyone, and welcome to my first Overwatch instructional video. I've received several requests to demonstrate how I play the character Tracer in games, and many have wanted to know what secrets might be employed, what general gameplay style is, and basically what things I do to make the character tick. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to take a brief aside to give you a little bit of background to my online competitive shooter gameplay. My breadth of knowledge in a variety of games simply isn't that vast, and I tend to specialize in a few select games which fit my personal playstyle. Within this caveat, to me, my most important asset is mobility and deception. I strive to make people miss, to set up favorable scenarios, and to keep my opponents on the back foot, either by attacking when he expects me to be retreating, or by moving so erratically that he has great difficulty in picking me up as a target. With that in mind, I found my home within the game of Overwatch, and I found the character Tracer. I want to begin this Tracer tutorial by stating the most important attribute of her character. Tracer is mobility. Her weapons, health, and even ultimate ability are all secondary to what she is in terms of battlefield dynamics and tempo. Knowing this, I want to explain what it is you will need in order to play an effective Tracer. You will need to be exceptionally fast at reading situations, have a keen eye for movement and the reflexes to adapt to new information as you observe it in your peripheral vision. You'll need to understand the dynamics of an Overwatch team and which heroes are critical for that team's success. You'll need to be able to read an opponent enough to get a feel for the person on the other side of your screen. What are his tendencies? How will he react? And you'll need to feel comfortable and confident to take on any hero in a one-on-one fight, knowing the ins and outs of each matchup. Now, much of this experience may come from previous games. Personally, I felt that the transition into Tracer to be smooth as silk from my earlier experience playing the game Space Marine, and found that the principles of mobility and misdirection to be perfectly analogous. To be honest, I felt the character was made just for me. If this is the sort of feeling you get when you play with the speedy Brit, then she just might be the right choice for you. An important note here, however, is that Tracer functions differently from the majority of choices on your team, including the mindset needed to play her. On nearly every team I play with, I try and ensure that our guys are staying focused on the objective and not straying from it. This is difficult, however, at times, since some newer or less experienced players will reply, "Well, you're not on the point," and things like that. Basically, Tracer should not be on the point unless it's a crisis situation. You must understand that as Tracer, you are leveraging one of your team's 6 players in a head-to-head firefight to gain the potential of targeted enemy team removal and disruption. The key difference here between, say, Tracer and Widowmaker is that Widow isn't necessarily the best flanker, and the enemy team needn't invest as much resources in keeping her head down or dealing with her at the same time as the rest of her team. With Tracer, you're attacking literally from anywhere and everywhere, even right in the middle of the enemy formation. By playing like this, you're forcing the enemy to either turn their attention away from your own team, or attacking the enemy at their rear and flanks, scoring massive burst damage, and simply erasing key players, keeping their strategy upright. Sure, your team will lose nearly 20% of its head-to-head firepower, but if you're able to neutralize the enemy healer and then, say, get their Reinhardt to turn around and waste his shield, then you've already won the battle. Moving right along, I'd like to take a brief moment to examine Tracer's abilities and equipment. I'll keep this brief as you can figure out pretty much what these are in your first few games. Tracer is equipped with a pair of fully automatic pistols, dealing high damage and with a high degree of projectile spread. You empty your magazines in about 1 second of sustained fire, and reload in the same amount of time. Fairly straightforward. As for abilities, Tracer can blink in whichever direction you're currently traveling, roughly 7.5 in-game meters horizontally, up to 3 times in a row, with each of those 3 blinks recharging over 3 seconds. These blinks take roughly 1 second to complete, making them ideal for reloading those pistols of yours during a firefight with an opponent. Think, shoot, blink, and reload, rinse, repeat. Next, you've got the ability to rewind time. With a 12-second cooldown, Tracer will return across the same route she traveled, arriving to where she had been 3 seconds prior. She will maintain the highest amount of health she had during those 3 seconds, either erasing damage you've just taken, or retaining the health pack you've just picked up before you rewind. Her pistols are reloaded, and you remove any status effects of items attached to you, say Zenyatta orbs, Widowmaker gas traps, etc. Finally, your ultimate ability is a pulse bomb, which sticks to whatever surface it touches. It deals moderately high damage over quite a small blast radius, but it's great for erasing a small group of non-tank enemies, and don't forget you can be damaged by this bomb yourself, so be careful. With the basics out of the way, the most important aspect of Tracer's kit is using it properly. Your pistols and your blinks are your bread and butter, so using these productively is tantamount to your success. Let's break down the whens and wherefores of using these two. In King of the Hill games, I recommend using your blinks exiting the flanking door of spawn, usually at the far left or far right, and speeding up that side of the map to arrive on the flank or behind your enemy. From here, you'll want to catch a glimpse of the enemy team composition and relay it to your allies. Remember, keep 1 or 2 blinks in the bank ready to go when you're in line of sight of an enemy. You don't want to be caught naked if you run into enemy flankers who have the same plan as you. Nothing's worse than walking into a Genji, Tracer, or Reaper when you've just used your last blink. Trust me, it's miserable. In payload defense games, you want to ambush their flanks when possible, and make life a living hell for whoever's supporting the enemy push, be it a Mercy, Lucio, or Reinhardt. Just keep biting at the enemy's heels and driving them apart, allowing your team an easier time to overpower them. When you're pushing the payload, you'll want to root out enemy sniper positions and help ensure the enemy trickle in. This goes hand in hand with knowing who your enemy is as a person. If you can draw 1 or 2 enemies to you instead of them coming in as a group to confront your teammates, you're doing your job. Further, picking off the lone enemy waiting for his teammates to reach the staging ground before going in as a team, that's 1 less enemy your team has to worry about, or that's another few seconds ticked off the clock before the enemy can mount another defensive push at full strength. If they know you're behind them, they also can't ever be fully focused on the payload, or if they are, it leaves you free rein to pick them off one by one. For point offense and point defense, your job is pretty much the same, though ironically, I find Tracer to be more valuable in defense when static points are involved. You're allowed to be much more free, and you can appear from anywhere, rather than being forced to attack a single location. In both circumstances, however, your job is to again force the enemy team to split their focus, making 1, 2, or 3 enemies peel off defending a choke point to deal with you in the backfield allows your 5 other teammates to overpower the remaining defenders. Further, on defense, if you hit their backlines, causing their offensive pushes to lose the strength of 1 or 2 attackers, it makes your defenses vastly superior, as, for example, a Bastion or Torbjorn turret versus 3 or 4 players instead of 5 to 6 is an enormous difference. Your goal is to be consistently on the flank or behind the enemy, as you've likely gathered, so you'll need to keep your objectives clear in mind when you're there, as you're working solo most of the time. Once you've reached just behind or adjacent to the enemy line, measure up your target priorities. First priority is Mercy, followed closely by Lucio and Widowmaker, and then by Hanzo, Junkrat, and Zenyatta. Mercy sometimes will sit in the center of her group, so if you spy a sniper or Junkrat at the very back but fairly exposed, feel free to take him out first. This can oftentimes go unnoticed by the rest of the enemy team, as they'll have begun to engage your team on the front line. To briefly touch on your positive matchups again, so you have a list of target priorities. This is a guideline, mind you, as situations always breed their own necessities. Mercy, Lucio and Widowmaker, Hanzo and lone non-counter heroes, and Reinhardt. And as for your unfavorable matchups, they include Roadhog, Pharah, McCree, Mei, Symmetra, Winston, and Bastion or Torbjorn. Now, I've read on numerous sites that Tracer is good versus Bastion. If you were on the PC, this is the cruelest lie you can be tricked into believing. On consoles, turning rates are significantly lower than with a mouse and keyboard. Let me make this abundantly clear. Unless you are facing a truly inferior Bastion player, you will die instantly. Under 1 second of fire will do it, oftentimes even canceling your rewind ability. The only times I can recommend engaging a Bastion are when he is insurmountably distracted by your allies and you have a clear shot at the blue critical hitbox, or when you need to desperation pulse bomb his ass back to the Stone Age, usually sacrificing yourself in the process. Getting back to your abilities and using them against enemy heroes, your pistols, with decent aim, should reliably kill a non-tank enemy in 2 to 3 magazines, accounting for misses, etc. This means that with 2 to 3 blinks in your bank, you should be able to tackle any non-tank 1v1, provided you don't make a grave error. Lucio is one exception to this rule, as a top tier Lucio is certain to make you expend upwards of 5 or even 6 magazines to finish him off. And I've had encounters where, even in a small room, it's taken a total of 20 to 25 seconds just to murder one by himself. Things to be cognizant of or to avoid would be Genji's reflectability. Simply watch for the animation, sit there, look at him dance doing nothing, and then erase his ass with your pistols once he's done with his Naruto hand gestures. Be advised, a good Genji may try to run right through you with his dash ability after failing with his deflect, so be ready to blink to one side and turn right around to rain death into his fleeing back. Also, be careful when dueling with Reaper, as he can one-shot you if you aren't careful. Keep a mid-range distance between you two as you whittle down his health. You'll likely force him to Wraith form to escape. If he's heading for a health pack, disengage or steal it from him. Isn't Blink wonderful? But if he has no health packs nearby, just follow him and unload your 40 pistol rounds into that lovely skull mask of his. Similar rules apply for McCree. You really don't care about his weapon aside from his stun grenade. Just keep mid-distance from him, make his aiming a living hell, and blink away. If he prematurely tries to stun or misses you, he'll fan the hammer immediately most times out of reflex. Just laugh, blink right onto him, and mow him down while he reloads. I recommend that you flat out avoid Symmetra unless she is so close to dying that you won't be hit by her weapon for longer than half a second. Roadhog, I generally suggest double teaming or finishing off. He's a beast for you to spike as it takes 4 or so full magazines to down him, and he can heal up during that time, all the while being able to one-shot you. This, for the viewers counting at home, is more time than you have blinks, so backup is recommended. Reinhardt, however, is a much more fun prospect, and can be one of the most rewarding kills for you. Provided he isn't surrounded by a bunch of his homies, which is rare but not unheard of, you can nip at him with precision strokes until he falls on his face from the bleeding. You'll want to get to know the opponent on the other side of the screen, and this is no more relevant than when it comes to Reinhardt. If you can get into his head and annoy the ever-living shit out of him, well, you'll have a significant advantage. It's all but gospel at this point that Reinhardt is there to shield his team and remain the central hub for them to push towards an objective. As Tracer, if you get into Reinhardt's head, a big guy with a hammer who loves being the strongest one out there, let's be real, falling to a little girl a few times can often make him a little mad. I've often made Reinhardt's turn fully around and chase me away from their team and the objective at mid to late game, due to frustration. This leaves their team without their strongest push element and will quite likely win your team the game. Don't forget, you can blink through his shield, his shoulder charge, and his fireball shots. I love appearing next to or behind him, unloading 1 to 2 mags until he notices, he'll turn with shield up, fire at it until you know his intentions, and then blink behind the shield, hit him again, and so on, going back and forth until he's finally bled dry of health. It isn't hard to do, but be careful of his hammer's ridiculous hitbox. Always have your rewind handy just in case, as he can two-shot you. Zenyatta is a difficult one, situation dependent. You need one of two things, since relying on Zenyatta being a bad player isn't a reliable option: your max bank of blinks, or the complete drop on him. You can and will be wrecked in 2 seconds or less otherwise by a competent Zenyatta even 1v1. He has Hanzo level hitboxes, and a Seeking Orb of Discord, leaving you open to be dropped in an incredibly short order, never mind if he has his team around him. Basically, just move as erratically as possible and stay accurate. Since he's so slow, Zenyatta isn't too hard to hit, but just stay focused and don't be afraid to run as soon as things look sticky. Don't forget that Discord Orb will leave you revealed to the enemy team even when you run, so don't think about hiding after a blink. Just get right out of there. And that about wraps things up so far as the ins and outs of Tracer are concerned. Again, just to kind of wrap things up, it's very important that your team be cohesive and be focused on the objective because, as I've described, your job isn't to be there on the point helping out your team. It's to be around the point, around the enemy, around the alleys and side rooms, basically flying in and out and everywhere in order to make the enemy team disperse and make them a less cohesive unit. So in that regard, your enemy has to shore up that gap of having one less player on the payload. So oftentimes, if you're in a random quick play match, people aren't cooperating, it's going to be a bit miserable for you, but if you can get a team together that stays together, stays on point, stays on task, and is very good at communicating both with you and you with them, then Tracer can be a very rewarding hero. I highly recommend giving her a try, as she's very skill intensive, but at the same time very effective given the right circumstance and scenario. Now, if there's anything else you'd like to know about Tracer, please feel free to leave a comment, and I'll do my best to address it either in a subsequent gameplay video or make a follow-up video for certain topics if there's enough interest in it. So with that in mind, good luck trying out Tracer.